Ms. Squicciarini supervises, coordinates, steers and helps advance policy-relevant work related to the social transformation, including the ethics of science and technology, in particular of artificial intelligence, the youth sport and anti-doping, inclusion, anti-racism and gender. But we will have 2 introductory remarks for the session, and the first will be provided by Mr. Igor Papič, Minister of Higher Education, Science and Innovation in the government of the Republic of Slovenia, also former rector of the University of Ljubljana, the oldest and the biggest university in Slovenia. Please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bergant. We have the same name, by the way. So, dear distinguished guests, dear Assistant Director General, dear Gabriela, our Minister, dear Emilia, distinguished guests, as I said, colleagues, friends, it's a great honor and pleasure for me to welcome you on the second day of the Global Forum on Ethics of Artificial Intelligence. Artificial intelligence is, of course, a very interesting subject for me. My background is in engineering, electrical engineering. I usually say that we started talking about artificial intelligence decades ago, probably 20, 30 years ago. And today, if I look at this hall, we have representatives from almost all over the world. I'm really glad that we have representatives from Africa, from Latin America, and this subject is becoming a global issue. Allow me to say a few words again about artificial intelligence. Recently, I was reading about the idea of one of our colleagues from our technical faculty here in Slovenia. He proposed the change of the name. We should use not artificial, but virtual intelligence. Why? Because, of course, these powerful machines, they provide the perception of intelligence. Of course, I'm an engineer. I, let's say, approximately know what is behind these systems. For me, these systems are still control systems. We have certain algorithms related to data mining, to machine learning, and things like that. So from my point of view, still far from any intelligence. But anyway, that's probably not the most important issue. I believe, as I mentioned before, that today, here in this place, we have a lot of experts in all other fields. In the field of social sciences or in the field of humanities. And as I said before, that means that we are going global. And my experience is always that closer than we are to practical application, closer to we are to final products, final services, more different experts we have to involve in the process of the development of these technologies. Of course, today we are talking about ethics. I hope it's clear for everybody there is no ethics of artificial intelligence. We should talk about the ethics of those that are using artificial intelligence. Beside this interdisciplinary approach, I think I have to mention also the new paradigm of the development. Let's say we are now in the middle of so-called Industry 4.0. We should switch soon to so-called Society 5.0. What's the difference? I believe that in the future we will have to work together, not only engineers, technologists on one side, but also experts from the field of social sciences to see what is the influence on our societies, and also with the expert from the field of humanities, what is the influence of new technologies on human beings. So future development, I believe, will be in the way that we are doing this simultaneously from the very beginning, not that later on, when certain technology start causing certain problems in the society, that then also other experts are involved. We should be working together from the very beginning. And it is also very clear that, at least for me, artificial intelligence is absolutely no threat. It's a tool. and we should use it in a proper way. And of course, by way of conclusion, I think we have 2 minutes or 5 minutes together with Gabriela. So by way of a conclusion, I expect good discussions today, and also I expect good inputs for policymakers from your side. We are going global, and we have to specify all the boundary conditions that this technology is used in the proper way, not in the way that we have any kind of misuse. So once again, I wish you a successful event today, a successful panel, and of course, I also wish you a pleasant stay here in Slovenia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Papič, because we share the name. You will also find some male individuals in Slovenia whose name is not Igor. And another remark, you would ask yourself, did they change the rules because the minister spoke English? Well, the rule of speaking Slovenian only applies only to opening ceremonies. So that's why he was speaking English. That were opening remarks. And we're ready now for the next opening remarks, which will be given, of course, by Mrs. Gabriela Ramos. Thank you.
Hello, good morning. And I'm speaking English, Minister. Great to be here with you. Great to be here, dear Emilia. And to have the room full. I mean, this has been quite a journey, and with these fantastic panelists. Let me just go directly into the subject matter, because I feel that yesterday we have been discussing the governance, we have been discussing how to steer the development of these technologies for good. All of the efforts and the participants have been underlying these issues. I think this panel that we are doing in cooperation with the Brazilian G20 presidency is getting into the details of what do we mean when things are not steered in the right direction. And the question of inequalities that President Lula and the Brazilian presidency have put on the issue of artificial intelligence, for me, is core to these discussions. And it's core because we know that if the technologies proceed in the pace that or in the way that they have been doing, they will just exacerbate the state of the world, which is highly unequal. High concentration of wealth, of income, opportunities, half of the world not connected, many parts in our societies not capable to really take advantage of these technologies. So we talk about inequalities due to impact in the labor market, who is prepared, who is going to be transforming their skills to take advantage of the new jobs that are being created, because we know that jobs are being created and probably we are creating more jobs than those that are disappearing, but who is prepared? Now with ChatGPT, we know that it's not only the task that can be replaced that will be substituted by artificial intelligence. We know now also that the high-level skills could be replaced. But let me tell you, I don't think they are very worried, because they are the ones that can be really transform themselves and actually receive the support. Because we also have, and Mariagrazia is an expert on that, we have studies that have shown that usually the training and the upskilling and reskilling that we hear all about are usually not reaching those that need it the most. And therefore, this is the question. No? The labor market is going to transform. What do we do about that to avoid that we see more inequalities growing up? The inequalities derive from the business model. Recent data from the OECD shows that 80% of the investments generated or linked to artificial intelligence accrue in the US or China. Therefore, again, on the one hand, you have 50% of the population not having access to stable internet. On the other hand, you have this high concentration of the assets and investments. And therefore, again, how do we ensure that this is more inclusive? Then the usual inequalities that are just reflecting, the minister said, is not about turning artificial intelligence into an ethical development. It's about us being ethical and the societies being ethical. So when we think about one aspect of the inequalities, which is core to my heart, which is the gender inequalities, and I did this lapsus yesterday in the opening ceremony, because at the end, what is happening is that the reflection of the gaps that we have in our societies, in terms of lack of representation, in terms of not being in the managerial positions, only 14 women leading their countries. Great to have you, Emilia, representing ministers at that level. But at the end, the technologies only represent what we are. And therefore, no surprise that even the representation at the level of managers or CEOs in the AI companies is just 18% for women, which is way below 30% in many other economic sectors. And therefore, I think that this is an issue. Taking aside all of the other impacts on women that these technologies have. And then, of course, all these compound leads to something that I feel is very important that we tackle, which is with this technology advancing in this manner, what happened is that it will be also discriminated against that are not represented against, and more, these technologies are being used to take decisions. Who gets a loan, who gets an interview, who gets, and therefore if we are not represented, if the data sets are not really representative, then we get into this situation. So I feel this is the thing to tackle, and I commend the Brazilian presidency for putting this high in the agenda. This is the issue, because at the end, if this is not delivering for everybody, we are just going to create a more divided world. And we are proud that the recommendation on the ethics of artificial intelligence took that view, because it's unethical to be unequal. And therefore, there's nothing more unethical than being prevented from developing our full potential because we are women, or because we are of a different color, or because we just simply don't have the skills to be there taking advantage of it. I think this is the core of what the recommendation is doing. We have many, and I invite you to read the recommendation. I have to say, I'm very proud because I did not draft the recommendation, and that makes me a cheerleader for it, because it's not self-serving. It was 24 fantastic experts that put the right words. They put the right words when the job market changes. Yes, governments need to produce the infrastructure to support this transition and help people to take advantage of the new opportunities. Women, yes, we need budgets dedicated to women-led startups. We need to take away all the stereotypes that we have even the schools and the education systems, and we need to avoid violence against women, which is another expression of how this can magnify the situation. So this is where we are in the recommendation, this is where we are in the AI, and then very proud to support the Brazilian presidency. I think that you have put the right issues at the table. We will be very pleased to work. We are a knowledge partner, as I call it, which is a nice category to be for the G20. I was myself a Sherpa for 10 years, and I know the power of this platform when you have a strong leadership, as we have in the case of Brazil. And we are working with the G20 presidency, first with a methodology for the assessment of national capabilities, and this is linked to the work that we're doing with so many countries, 50 countries, with the readiness assessment methodology, a mapping of AI solutions for public services, and an international event on the challenges of AI developments. So we know that this combination of a very strong global standard, this combination that is a testimony of your presence here, of the presence of so many ministers and the leadership of Slovenia, that we need to steer this in the right direction. And now with the G20, I think that we have a great combination to deliver for good. So thank you for your attention, and looking forward to the discussions.
Can you hear me? Yes. Good morning, everybody. So as you see, I am one of the lucky moderators, because a lucky moderator has a very good maître de conférence who can spell the name of the participants, as we saw, and then has two fantastic introductory remarks that actually facilitate life in the sense of putting on the table exactly what we are going to talk about. And then the lucky moderator, which is me again, has the pleasure to have a panel that features really top thinkers about these issues, because we have been discussing yesterday, especially, to say it in a, let's say, economic sense, the macro dimension. What are the institutions? What are the actors that need to be around the table? What needs to be done? How to really make and put AI at the service of humanity. But now today is really the day of discussing more the how to. So we know now, and I think there hasn't been so much convergence seen before in any other event or in any other discussion about what needs to be done. But now the real work needs to start. And so the question becomes how to translate what we need and we know needs to be done into how to do that, how to achieve the goals. And what we have heard so far is that, unfortunately, by the time it comes to inequalities, the inequalities are many. It's inequalities within the technology itself, so the gender discrimination, even the racial discrimination. And, I mean, very often, by the time we talk about these things, it seems like something philosophical. It is not. Let me make an example. In health, typically, the data on which AI algorithms rely are mainly based on data that belong to men. So, for instance, it becomes very difficult to predict infarctus in women. And this is not a secondary fact. So it actually leads to big inequalities and at times life-threatening. But then there is also, and this is what ADG Ramos was referring to, inequalities in the access to the very technology, in the ability to shape the technology in order to carefully address what are the needs and desiderata of the different parts of the world, because it's true that there are some common goods and some common needs that AI can be catered for. But we are all very different, and this is the beauty of humanity. And AI has the power to address all our needs, of course, if directed in the right way. So I'm really pleased to have with me today Renata Vicentini Mielli, who is the Special Advisor of the Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation of Brazil. I also have with me Inma Martinez, so I will have a bit to move so that we keep the conversation dynamics, because this is the beginning of the day and of a long and important day. So Inma Martinez is the plenary chair of the Multi-stakeholder expert group and also the co-chair of the steering committee of GPAI. I also have Merve Hickok, who is the president and research director at CAIDP. I also have Zeng, who is professor at the Chinese Academy of Science and member of the UNSG High-Level Advisory Board on AI. And then on my left-hand side, I have Matjaž Gruden, who is the director of democratic participation of the Council of Europe, Shyam Krishna, who is research associate at the Alan Turing Institute, and last but not least, Emmanuelle Ganne, who is a senior analyst at the WTO. So what I'll do, I'll actually ask the same question to my panelists and asking them actually to feel free to take a different take to it, because I want to minimize the time I'm speaking. I want to listen to your solutions. So the question for you to start with, and then we will go to another round, is really how can the international community, and this means, of course, not only the governments, but also academia and civil society, tackle this persistent issue, we have heard of it, of unequal distribution of assets, and how to address the high concentration of assets and capacity, of course, including data, that we observe that is owned by just a handful of economic agents. So I'll start with Renata to hear the voice of the Brazilian presidency of the G20.
Thank you, Mariagrazia. I would like to thank Gabriela for all the support and you in our work on the artificial intelligence group in the digital group on G20. It's a very, very responsibility for us to bring this conversation in the terms of how to face these inequalities in terms of infrastructure, in terms of capacities that countries needs to have to be producers of this technology and not only consumers. And to answer your question, I would like to say that problems related to technological asymmetries among countries have existed in many areas for a long time. It's not a new thing. In the aerospace industry, semiconductor field, pharmaceutical has become very, very explicit during the COVID pandemic. This scenario has deepened with the emergence of large digital platforms, which, in a way, determine the economic model of today's society. Few large companies operate in various economic sectors, but their operations converge on platforms that mediate commercial transactions, flow of information between people, such as social networks, service, provision services, to name a few examples. This new pattern further increases the trend towards concentration, key assets for the development of both artificial intelligence and maintaining the leadership of these companies in their segments. The primary asset is the economy is data. So if I could point out a strategic aspect for countries to address inequality in this field, I would say it's crucial to invest in the construction of data centers so that countries have some sovereignty over the storage, processing, and use of their data. They can develop systems that represent social, economic, and cultural aspects, interoperable in terms of technological standards, with anonymization mechanisms and privacy protection, as well as security. This process can and should begin with the construction of data centers for the storage of public interest area and public interest data, such as health, education, and research data. Currently, part of the data and knowledge produced, for example, by universities and research institutes in many countries is stored in private clouds, which could put in risk the sovereignty of these countries. Certainly, there are many other aspects and challenges that need to be addressed, but in these minutes, I would highlight this aspect. Data sovereignty is central to the development, implementation, and use of AI by countries that have any ambition of self-determination in this area. So for now, I point this aspect of the question you made. Thank you.
Don't be shy, you can applaud. It's very nice to hear. Because Renata put on the table a couple of very important points, that is information and technology asymmetry, coupled with concentration being the challenge, and starting putting on the table also possible solutions. That is, one among others is really data centers. Actually, let's go down to GPAI. Inma, please.
Thank you, thank you.
You have to take a microphone.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting GPAI. Thank you, UNESCO, and thank you so much to the government of Slovenia for the kind and thoughtful hosting. GPAI has a vision of this inequality from a data perspective, and it's from the fact that for over 20 years, the internet was unregulated. And all of the data gathering that all of these companies began to harvest, nobody wondered if it was too much, if it was too little, for what purpose. And finally, since we cannot change the past, we definitely can ensure that the future is a future that assures our values. So if we look at the typical data that is gathered from a person when they access a service, there is no need for any private company to demand passport data. So passports, if we all remember, belong to the governments who issue the passport. It doesn't even belong to you. If you damage the passport, you get a fine. So we should begin to enforce the data collection. We should begin to establish that a company that asks people for their birth date should not ask for a full birth date, but just ask people to tick on a box of their age bracket. Or maybe, are you older than 18? Yes. Because the danger is not that this data is abused, which it is, to build enormous profiles of individuals, but that more and more and more the hacking community is getting very clever at accessing the data servers where the data is stored, and then extract these data, sell it, and then use it to create fake IDs, open bank accounts, and many other theft, typically financial. So let's begin to query and audit the data gathering processes of the private sector. If you want to access a streaming service to watch films, this person does not need your home address. They will never deliver anything physical to you. So let's establish the parameters under which the real world data of people is gathered. And then there is the aspect of the real world evidence data, which is the data that proves that something is true and is indirect. So for example, my IP address proves to that company that I am sitting in London and therefore I can access the BBC iPlayer, because if I go down to France, it just doesn't let me in. I didn't provide that IP, but the IP denotes my location and therefore is an evidence of where I am. So there is this aspect of the justice of the data. Is this data too much? Should they be allowed to continue extracting these enormous amounts of profiling data? And not only that, but can they prove to us, to governments, that is necessary for the undertaking of their business? Because it's not. So I think that that is a huge area that we can tackle immediately and very clearly. And the private sector, of course, has been gathering up until now quite a lot, but we at least can ensure that they stop the massive data extractions. And then we need to also ensure that all of the companies that are gathering the precious data of citizens can assure cybersecurity, can assure decentralized data storage infrastructures, that they are using blockchain to separate the data, because the fundamental aim of hacking is to grab your email and then test it on a bank to see if you use the same. If it is, you already have 50% of what you need to enter that bank account. This is how hackers think. So we need to demand that companies are creative in their user interface designs, so that can you allow a person to use your system without extracting critical data? Is there another way in which I can create an account to watch these films that is not going to demand of me the dangerous data that I do need to provide if I want to open a bank account, if I need a credit card, if I need to prove to the police or anything? That is, and that's why the European concept of the one time only, in which the government, since the day that you're born, begins to gather your ID, but you only release it one time. And then as you go along in life, you don't need to again fill it out on a website. It connects to the government, it extracts the data, you don't have to fill it up again. Governments should own the citizen data, not companies.
Absolutely, Inma. You put on the table really the excessive data gathering that we all face. I would like to see whether there is even barely one hand here that has never encountered that problem. And of course, related to that, the possible abuse and misuse. And you, in some way, said that, well, proportionality and do no harm should also apply to data. Whatever you get actually is what you need and not in excess of it, and ensure cybersecurity. Let me go on exactly the other side of this table. So please, Matjaž, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, I would also like to thank the UNESCO and the Slovenian government for organizing this forum. I'm particularly pleased in Slovenia for many reasons, some of them selfish. Now, on the question, it's always intriguing when you get a very, very complicated question and you ask to be concrete and complete, and you have like a minute to do so. So I'll start by saying that I will most certainly fail miserably at it. But coming from the Council of Europe perspective, and under that intriguing title, Director for Democracy, includes responsibilities for education, youth, civil society, media and culture and heritage. I was trying to find a way how to sort of, in a concise way, sum up the approach that is necessary. And I came up with this old adagio that we need something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue. Blue is such a nice color to symbolize international cooperation, because it's a flag of the United Nations, it's a flag of the European Union, it's the flag of the Council of Europe. And for those who are not in the know, the flag of the European Union is actually Council of Europe flag, but we let them use it because we're nice people. And we are doing, I think, all UNESCO, of course, European Union, Council of others, our part within our mandates to contribute to that international infrastructure frameworks that are necessary for issues and challenges that are by default international and global. And the Council of doing is that, as the Secretary General has mentioned yesterday, with the ongoing negotiations on the legal instrument on Council of Europe Convention on Artificial Intelligence based on human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. Borrowed, it just means that, you know, there's absolutely so much to do that we need to help each other out. We need to work together. We cannot all do everything because there's absolutely too much to do. And just thinking of an example from education, you know, assessing, certifying resources, IT tools that can be used in education is too much for every individual government. So we need to find ways to work together on this. And if something is certified, perhaps in Portugal, Slovenia could use it, doesn't have to go through all the process. Just an illustration of something old is that when we're talking specifically about the issue of access to data and IT, the digital resources, the old you know, competition rules that I remember from law school are applicable here, because we're talking about markets and commodities in a way, and you know, we have the regulations and principles that can let us, that can help us in preventing dominant positions, and we can try to monopolist practices. We can encourage competition, small, medium size companies, diversify that offer, open it up. Open source is extremely important, and I'd like to support, which the Council of Europe does, the UNESCO's initiative on open resources, and Slovenia has been very, very involved in that as well. And finally, new, because we're dealing with something that actually we are intervening and responding to something we actually know still very little about. Which is not a very comfortable place to be, but we have to. It's not that we don't know what it is, we don't always know where it leads to. And I think we need absolutely much more knowledge, we need more research. And again, talking from education point of view, while we're not introducing artificial intelligence in education, it is already there. But we need to intervene that, but in order to do that properly, we need to know more about its impact and consequence. And we have to go beyond the simple metric measuring the academic progress. We have to look at the impact that it has on learners' cognition, on mental health, on human rights, because this is still very, very unknown. I had 3 other points that were very important. I have 30 seconds, but don't be too worried. They're all education. So I think the last part I would say is education and education and education. And I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Actually, education, and if you allow me, human capital empowerment, as I prefer to call it, because I think for too long we have had a discussion that has focused on education as the entry point to the labor market. That is, people go through education, then they enter the labor market, and off you go, and then you retire, regardless of the number of jobs you might have. AI revolution, and this we have seen already in the course of the digital transformation, has told us very clearly that you cannot consider education, skilling, and upskilling as something that happens before you enter the labor market. It's something that needs to accompany all of us throughout our life in the labor market, and hopefully for everybody to be able to be in the labor market. Because technology changes, you were saying it, that is like it's a moving target. So there are a number of challenges to be addressed, in addition, in a framework that changes continuously. And so perhaps certification, but then the question becomes of what and how to, becomes important. And it is so important to the point that actually last year, in the course of the G20 presidency of India, India gave UNESCO the task to actually work on a virtual center of excellence, as they called it, which actually was aimed at compiling a bit of an inventory of what are the skills needed in the digital era, which doesn't mean only digital skills, but also means social-emotional skills, working in collaboration, readiness to change, managing changes and addressing new problems, and actually trying to elaborate some kind of quasi-equivalences between skill endowment and job typologies in order to be able to address what it is, the lack of transparency in the labor market, whereby not only workers are not able to find the job they look for, because it's very difficult to understand which kind of skills this person has, but also this is not really helpful for companies that are unable to scan the market in relation to the kind of skills they really need. Now, you talked about a blue collar. Let me go perhaps to E, to discuss perhaps the color of the SDG. Can you address this question from that perspective?
Well, thank you. I want to remember everyone that the motivation to have a technology like AI is like what we have described in the recommendation on ethics of AI, that AI is enabling technology that power up not a single nation, but really to a global sustainable development. I think that's really important. Recently, actually, as an extension of our work on the recommendation, now we're doing the readiness assessment methodologies, helping all the nations. I wanted everyone from the countries that you provided your data. Otherwise, as independent expert, we have to crawl everyone's data all together to understand how these countries are actually moving. Recently, we have a report called the AI Governance International Evaluation Index, which talk about, as a core, is the RAM that we provided as the high-level implementation group that actually are helping the governments to do the evaluation. And one of the core that we've been finding for different countries is that now all over the world, when you gather all the AI papers together, only 0.1% of the papers are related to sustainable development, which is horrible. Only 1.1% of the papers are related to sustainable development. And you know what is the big numbers? The big numbers are AI for healthcare, AI for education, which is good in some way. But on the other hand, just think about the reasons. The reason is that you can make a lot of money from AI for healthcare and AI for education. But how about AI for inequalities? How about AI for zero hunger? How about AI for these life below and on the water and on land? Actually, not so much people are actually working on it because you cannot make a lot of money from it. But the government, the civil society, they need it. So I think that's horrible that now only a very small portion of the AI research are focusing on these applications related to sustainable development. And also for these 70 pillars, you only been interested in these 3, that healthcare, education, and industry, but not the others. I think that's horrible. So I think it's really important, you know, to dig into the reality, to make AI really power, you know, all the pillars of sustainable development. Without any of the pillars, we're not successful by 2030, right? I wanted to get back to your first question a little bit on accessibility, that I think, of course, the stability of the internet is very important, but I wanted to bring you another perspective to understand that what technology can bring us to. When I was traveling from Shanghai to Hong Kong, I wanted to buy something to eat on the plane separately. And then they say, yeah, you can buy it. You can use your code and then pay. And I said, I don't really have an internet. And then they say, just show us your QR code. We will sort out the way to, you know. And then we did it. Actually, I can buy things without an internet. So for those giant companies, if they wanted to make money, they will find their way to actually do it. And I actually, my money was actually gone after I landed. So that means for some of the services that maybe the internet, the quality of the internet can be partially solved in a wise way, I would say. So what's more important now is that for these generative AIs, now you don't really have that need a lot of real-time data to do the services. What you need now is a more interactive platform. In that case, the internet connection, I think it will be okay. But the problem would go back to what Gabriela said, that at the beginning, that when you're providing services to, you know, dozens of languages, but how about the training? Many of the training are trained on English, but the interface is in your language, but the cultures are in English. So that's the real challenge. So this is why I'm proposing that each and every country of you, that we should have your own generative AI supported by someone, or you do your own, but really use your own data, your culture to train it. So that you get your services based on your culture, and then you find the interoperabilities among these cultures also by using AI. The last thing that I wanted to share is that I was always challenged, you're coming from a completely different culture. Although we are very different, but we still wanted the collaboration. And I was like, can we just stop as we are completely different? When we wanted to do something, actually we did. That is for the global recommendation of AI, we asked for a policy saying AI to push forward cultural interactions. Actually, we put all the UNESCO World Heritages all together and do the analysis. The UNESCO World Heritages was designed actually to say that your culture is specific, it contributes to the world culture in a very unique way. Of course it's unique, but on the other hand, all the world heritages are actually connected, naturally connected to each other. That shows how culture are connected. So what I'm saying is that powered by AI, we're not that different. Thank you.
Absolutely. Actually, I really love the way you put it, because if you read the recommendation on the ethics of artificial intelligence of UNESCO, you find a definition of the relationship with the environment, which I found beautiful. Again, I'm another one of those that joined UNESCO by the time the main recommendation was discussed and was already on the table. And again, I couldn't really appreciate more what had been the work of the experts in the back. And in the recommendation, it talks about ecosystem flourishing. So it goes beyond protection. It really talks to the need that AI not only preserves what it finds, but actually contributes to improve it. And another thing that I don't think I've heard discussing a lot, not only here, but also in other constituencies, is something that actually we have been discussing a lot in the context of sport. Now, what is the parallel here? It is very difficult to go beyond the quick appreciation of what, for instance, sport can do for mental or physical health. What is very difficult to monitor is the societal return, like the inclusion, the non-discrimination, the societal coherence, the participation in democratic processes that sport can do. So assessing the returns to societies that actually AI can bring through the services it can enable is not a trivial thing, and is less than that by the time we talk about the environment, because the benefits are to some sort, we can say, diluted, and so it's very difficult to assess. And perhaps this call for the development, and here we have fantastic researchers around to whom I will give the word, to be able to actually map and create perhaps a framework that allows to measure what is the possible contribution of AI system to broader societal dynamics. And a last point you made that, again, is something that is very dear to UNESCO, is the languages for us are really the door to culture. So by the time you speak a language, it's not only about the language itself, it's about what is the mindset in the back. And this is also something that becomes very, very clear by the time we talk about very mixed teams, for instance, in like gender mixed, and not only in a binary sense, mixed teams when generating AI, because we think differently. And this actually ends up in contributing wealth in the way, and of course efficiency and effectiveness of the AI system in the way then the systems can deliver, and bringing our different perspectives also helps addressing the shortcoming, because perhaps what I don't see, you do see. Let me go now to Emmanuelle, because I think it would be very interesting to add a world trade type of perspective to this.
Thank you very much. Delighted to be here, and thank you for UNESCO for having put this event together, and for the G20 presidency for this session. So let me start maybe on a positive note. From a trade perspective, AI actually opens huge opportunities for traded goods. It can help to optimize logistics, it can facilitate customs clearance, and as a matter of fact, quite a few customs authorities are already using it to better assess risk, for example. So it can make supply chain management much more efficient and can facilitate access to finance, in particular trade finance, which is a key issue for small businesses, which really struggle to secure trade finance to participate in international trade. So very interesting opportunities that AI creates. It's a sort of enabler. It can reduce trade costs, and this can particularly favor small businesses. Now, when we think about trade costs, one key issue are the tariffs that we impose on ICT equipment. High tariffs can limit access to and can increase the cost of access to essential hardware, and therefore make adoption of AI technologies more complex. We have an agreement at the WTO, which is the Information and Technology Agreement that was negotiated in 1996 by 29 members that eliminates tariffs on IT products. And in 2015, members decided to expand the coverage of this agreement to more than 200 products, and there are now 50 members participating in this ITA2, as we call it, Information and Technology Agreement 2. So these are important levers to promote adoption of AI. Likewise, on the services side, ICT services in telecommunications and computer software are also critically important. because they actually play a critical role in establishing the communication networks that allow the development of AI systems, but also in terms of creating the markets where AI technologies can be monetized. WTO members are asked to make commitments in that area under the General Agreement on Tariffs, on Trade and Services, sorry, GATS. So these, what I want to say is that trade rules and trade policies actually matter very much. If you think of AI as an enabler, this point was made earlier on, trade policies and trade rule can be the enabler of the enabler. And I think this is something that is important for people to consider when they think about adoption of AI and AI being a tool for inclusion. But of course, we all know that also AI gives rise to concentration of assets because of the very heavy upfront investments and the fact that it uses very large data sets. And this is indeed a particular worry. On my way here, I was actually reading a report by McKinsey that just came out on the leaders and laggards in terms of companies. And their findings show that the gap between the leaders and the laggards is increasing worldwide. Now, when it comes to this question of unequal access to the technology, one thing that I wanted to flag are the discussions that are taking place at the WTO in the context of the Joint Initiative on E-commerce, which touch upon very important issues like cross-border data flows, open government access, this is something that was mentioned earlier, personal data protection, access to open source. These issues will play a critical role in AI governance and in the way AI can be used, including as a tool to benefit all. So I think it's important for people to keep that in mind and to follow these discussions, to get involved so that we make sure that indeed whatever is being agreed creates a positive level playing field, creates a positive environment. So clearly, new rules, approaches are needed if we want to ensure that AI works as a tool that works for all, as a tool for inclusion. And here, the WTO, when it comes to trade, is a forum for discussion where a number of these issues are being discussed, where experience is being shared. And I think it's very important that we, at an international level, also connect the dots and that we all work together as international organizations and jointly with other partners to try and see what are the best rules and what is the best environment to promote the use of AI for inclusion. Thank you.
And she gets the prize for the perfectly on-time person to speak, actually. She's actually stopping at the 0. Thanks a lot. And also for putting two new things on the table. On the one hand, trade finance. How are we going to compete and participate internationally if we don't have the resources able to do that? But on the other hand, there is a solution, and this is actually one of the things that motivated the recommendation on the ethics of artificial intelligence, that is leveling the playing field. A playing field where the rules are the same for everybody and where everybody knows the rule of the game makes life of everybody easier, especially of those that are smaller or have less asset to be able to play, because then they can actually operate knowing what is awaiting. Let me go now more towards the research side of the discussion. So actually, please, Shyam, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Mariagrazia, and thanks to the Slovenian host, the Brazilian host, and the UNESCO host as well, and specifically the ADG's team for giving me the opportunity to be here. I'm going to kind of like pick on certain ideas that have already been said and build on it. One way I look at AI from a critical academic perspective is what does a fair AI future look like? The current trajectory is that we are looking at what people have termed and I would term as an AI monoculture on who gets to define the outputs because they control the influences on what gets into AI and what gets modeled, how data is produced. Right? So are we happy for a fairer future where everything is bland and coming from one specific view of what culture looks like? We aren't. And that's something Professor touched on about the cultural diversity of data that's required, right? How do we then undo this trajectory? So we need to look for alternative perspectives from across the world, like Buen Vivir from Latin America, for example, or self-respect movement in India. And I specifically work on the idea of caste and AI and how they overlap. It's a very understudied dimension. The sociocultural dimensions have already been acknowledged by UNESCO in areas like the readiness assessment on gender and race, but caste doesn't find a place yet because it's bundled with race. But if we don't allow for this diversity to be thought about in academic circles, in the way it frames the underlying sociocultural data, those who are marginalized based on the sociocultural dimension would not be able to participate. One example I'll say is it's very, very visible. Just go and search for photos of Indian children in any stock photo websites or open data sets. You would see a very Western view of dusty roads, torn clothes, essentially a very patronizing view from a very Western eye, right? So how do we upend that? We don't have a way, we don't have a data set that shows happy, content children and how that should be fed actually into AI, because that is the only way we can identify how a fair AI would be able to make children safe in the future. How are we going to get together and do that? There are kind of efforts like this in the global north, but very little in the global south. So how do we get together and do this is a good question to ask. Another important issue here is, even if we do get the data set, who has the social capital, the sociocultural lived experience to define what fair output would look like? So that's where representation and design teams, as someone raised that earlier, matters. Another example I will say is, currently the English language outputs kind of fall back on age-old castes portrayals. For example, just by the mere mention of a surname, it assumes what kind of a profession that person would do based on their caste surname in Indian terms, and what their parents would probably look like and what their social condition is. If you replace that dimension with anything other than that, like gender or race, that would be completely unacceptable or even illegal in many parts of the world. So how do we counter something like this with participation of AI designers who have lived experience and would be able to confidently assert their ideas of fairness? And in that sense, for me, AI should not just be an enabling technology. It should also be an empowering technology of bringing those voices out. So what do we then ask of the future of generative AI? We need to think about how do communities, their culture and livelihood who are affected by this become part of a conversation. One idea is to allow for multiple localized data sets that can stand for what diversity looks like. One way is to do that is make a specific sectoral view of collecting diverse data sets. We've talked about health and education. The biases that I've just described, if it flows through into health and education, is not only going to give a unrepresentative biased output, it's going to kind of take progress in the negative direction, mainly because in the real world, activists and advocacy groups have actually made some progress in kind of confronting these biases. But AI, because it's produced at a different area without inputs of these groups, can actually undo that, because AI really is a cultural tool. It's not just a technological tool. Generative AI specifically, it affects text, speech, images, everything that we use for cultural expression. So we have a duty to actually undo that pathway that AI is taking now. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Shyam. Actually, you reminded us of something that Einstein is told to have said some time ago, that is, like, by the time you want to resolve a challenging problem, start defining the problem itself. That is, how are we going to address actually minorities and diversity if we don't define clearly what fairness should look like? And on this, I would like to turn over to Merve. Please, go ahead.
First of all, thank you so much for Slovenia, UNESCO for the invitation, as well as the Brazilian presidency. You asked about how to tackle the power concentrations, power and asset concentrations, with especially big technology companies in the hands of a few powerful actors. So my first reaction is obviously stand united. We need united front, a common agenda, and enough pressure to change some of the business practices and the incentives. But also public engagement. I want to tackle this question from a public engagement and policymaking angle, as well as civil society engagement. So we at the Center for AI and Digital Policy, we work at the intersection of human rights, democracy, and AI policy. And we've been involved with global AI policymaking for several years now. And in many of the geopolitical discussions that we're involved, AI policy, AI conversations are framed as a race. For us, race means a winner takes all. It is a zero-sum game. It is where one side wins, the powerful wins, and many of the others are left behind when the inequities are widened as well. But it doesn't have to be this way. So I suggest instead of this race framing, we use raise framing, raising the bar for all of us and raising the bar for human rights and inclusion. And that's where I think UNESCO's recommendations are so important. At the center, we train AI policymakers, future AI policymakers, I'm going to mention in a second. But UNESCO recommendations actually make up a good portion of our syllabus. It makes a good portion of how we assess countries for their commitments. And it is a framework that we continue to engage and push forward globally in all our conversations. Because all these countries that are represented here, 193 countries, came together to agree on certain norms. It is based and building upon Universal Declaration of Human Rights, something that we already, as a common front, agreed upon. So how can we move this forward? And I also heard over the last couple of days that you are looking, and when I say you, I mean the country delegations, that there are a lot of discussions about talent, public awareness, how to engage the public, and you work for public interest. So what we've done as a practical solution over the years is 4 years ago, we noticed a big gap in AI policymaking and public engagement. As a civil society organization, we were seeing the same faces again and again in the policymaking conversations. And we had a lot of people who were reaching out to us, technologists, civil society advocates, lawyers, academics, who wanted to involve in their own countries policymaking on AI, but didn't know how to, didn't know what their country was doing, didn't know how to engage. So we started these AI policy clinics where we bring together a very diverse group of people, like I said, technologists, academics, civil society advocates, activists, even policymakers and practitioners in governments. We are now in our 7th semester, so 4 years, 7th semester. And our current semester, our cohort has 350 people from 85 countries. So we are training policymakers ready to engage with your policymaking in every one of your countries. I think with the exception, I was checking yesterday, with the exception of Maldives, so we need to work on that. But there is a serious group of people who are ready to engage, bring their experiments, but just not sure how to engage with the government. So I would say, one, make it more accessible for the public to engage with the policymaking, make them understand, bring public together and into the conversation. and also engage with civil society more. Civil society can be the bridge for further public interest conversations, to bring these different parties together, to increase capacity for the government, as well as to raise awareness about what the government is doing. For us, our work would not be possible if it wasn't for visionary leaders like Vilas from Patrick McGovern Foundation, as well as leaders like Director Gabriela Ramos. We need support, and we need governments to understand that civil society plays for this important role between the public, between local communities, indigenous communities, and the government. So.
Thanks a lot, Merve. So it's music to our ears in the sense that what we do by definition is really international coordination and collaboration, pushing towards that. And I think in this case, it is also very important to remind us about the importance of multilateral and multi-stakeholder. This is what also you reminded us with. And you put another very interesting and important element on the table, that is put the right incentive at stake for people to act, governments to act, any agent for that matters to act in the right direction. And this links very well to the second question I would like to ask you, and is what needs to happen so that countries and governments can become independent from what is the current status of play that sees very few economic agents building AI and large language models that are based on their very own culture, data, and identities. And again, I'll start with Renata, please.
Thank you, Mariagrazia. Well, I think countries should define their strategies in this area to fill the gaps in the field of computational infrastructure, qualification of human resources to lead research, development, and training AI models. But I will go further because we have to look all the entire AI economic chain, because we won't be able to develop our large language models and AI if we don't tackle the problems related to availability of electricity production and maintenance of equipment such as power generators, engines, and hydraulic pumps for cooling data centers, because these large language models use a lot of energy and water, and how we find alternatives to serve farms and data centers to reduce energy and water consumption, to minimize the environmental impact, is another fundamental challenge that we hear a few times here. We also need to debate the aspect of meaningful connectivity and access, not to mention how to reduce equipment prices for the population, because these large language models needs to be used for the population. So population needs to access this kind of technology. And after all, if you are talking about leaving no one behind, we need to locally develop capabilities to offer better services to society. This requires building ongoing digital education processes for the entire population, from young to old, for people living in both urban and rural areas. In addition to connectivity, we need to consider the availability of equipment, especially mobile phones, which are the most commonly used devices to access services that have quality and minimal capacity to run applications and tools to use AI. Since each country has different reality in each of these areas, I would say that the word cooperation is crucial. Seeking regional cooperation mechanisms, mainly that establish complementary strategies by considering the capabilities of each country, can be a more effective and faster path to overcoming inequalities and achieving greater autonomy for countries. And in terms of application of AI, we have to learn with each other experiences, understand that kind of application that had good impact, and learn with the good practices, but is even more important in learning from what went wrong, so to develop AI for good and for the public interest. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Renata. Indeed, we discussed this at the beginning, the importance of thinking about energy consumption and anyway ecosystem flourishing by the time we produce, use, or deploy AI. And another thing that you put the attention on is not only meaningful connectiveness. What does it mean, meaningful? Does it suffice to be connected, or do we need to have certain standards of connection to then be really fair in allowing for the use and deployment of AI? But also, it is really key to raise awareness about what is AI, what does AI, and when we get in contact with AI, and what we might want AI to do for us, and what we might not want AI to do for us or with us and our data. So actually, I would love to bring again back Inma, although I'm going to be a bit naughty. So as I feel a bit like at school, I'm doing like this, right, when you were listening to the teacher. So I might change the order of the intervention. Go ahead, Inma.
Well, one of the issues that we've been discussing is how should governments develop their own AI, right? Governments have not developed their own many nothings, because if you look at infrastructure, the Canal de Suez in the early 20th century was not developed by Panama, sorry, the Panama Canal, but by Monsieur Eiffel, the engineer of the Tour Eiffel, and a consortium. And all the infrastructure of roads and railroads and water projects are built by private companies with banking, infrastructure finance, and then governments come in with a mezzanine of 2 to 3%. So what's important is that governments ensure that universities and research centers have appropriate funding to develop those models, to ensure that the development and creation of the AI of the future is democratized and not just controlled by a handful of companies sitting in one particular country. And this is precisely what the US Congress was presented with in February last year, the need for a democratization of the development of AI. And at country level, you have to ensure what are your strengths and weaknesses and where you need to go and get partners. Not every country will be able to build massive data center infrastructure because their energy resource is still carbon-based, and therefore the grids are very weak and will not sustain what you demand of the grid in order to build a massive 100 megawatt center. But you can partner with a country with whom you do things together and then share those costs and share the resources and then develop things together. So we need to have a mind that leverages from all the infrastructure that we already have. We think together as to what is it that is needed in real terms. And the most important thing is that when we build AI, we build it in collaboration. That is fundamental, because otherwise we end up with silos. And then once it's built, it's very difficult to untangle and to correct, because the very nature of AI is to evolve and to assume certain aspects of the training, and then you never know where you need to enter, you know? So infrastructure will be fundamental, that is shared, but also the need to empower universities and research centers to have the appropriate funding to do so. And why is that? Because when the private sector develops an AI that governments feel a bit concerned about, an academic center will be able to prove, yes, you can audit this part, yes, you can extract this. If we can show it to you, why don't they show it to you? You need that benchmark.
Thanks a lot, Inma. Indeed, an issue that has been discussed now for some time, also because, of course, what companies can offer to AI developers is completely different from what, for instance, universities can offer. And there's been a problem also of ensuring the intergenerationality of researchers to create the new waves. So actually, let me go down to Matjaž. As you said, nurture research, I really loved it, to democratize AI. So you were speaking about education, 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 and education very often comes with research. So over to you.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Well, I'd like to go back to what Minister Papič said in his introductory speech when he said that we're not talking about the ethics of AI, we're talking about the ethics of the use. We're talking about the ethics of human behavior and human interaction. And we know that humans are inherently ethical unless they're not. So we need rules and we need regulations to make sure that people and subjects do not act unethically. But we are not going to have that only if we're going to coerce people into ethics. Just preventing them from acting unethically, including when it comes, of course, to the use of technology and artificial intelligence. That's why the importance of education, which in the Council of Europe context includes the acquisition of skills for the labor market, but is much broader than that. Of course, it's also includes empowerment, personal development, competencies that are necessary to live like an active citizen, lifelong learning. And we have developed the tools and methodologies to transfer those skills and competencies that are necessary through formal and non-formal education, framework competence for democratic citizenship, and we have converted those competencies into a digital environment. So the education for digital citizenship is therefore important, because we will not be able to live and manage and benefit from that technology if we will not have citizens that will not only understand and be able to use, but will also have all those other skills and competencies that are necessary. Attitudes, critical thinking, literacy, all sorts of it, including technological arts, solidarity. These are the important issues. Next year is going to be 2025 is going to be the European Year of Education for Digital Citizenship, which will be an opportunity to mobilize everybody for the search for the best policy solutions, responses, to organize that education in our countries. I'm very pleased that Slovenia has agreed to host one of the 4 conferences that are going to be part of that exercise. And I think that ending with ethics, which is in the title of this, we need to invest in that education, because how are we going to do something about inclusion, which is here in the title? How are we going to talk about ethics, about solidarity, about fairness, in a situation where we have to ask ourselves, do we still have the same understanding of those notions? Do we still agree about what that means and how we're going to achieve it? So without investing into education for ethics in all different forms, nothing of this is going to work, unfortunately. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Indeed, skill for inclusion and societal empowerment, which is the added piece to this puzzle. And indeed, these days, having at least awareness and a minimum set of skills is not only to enter the labor market, it's also even to go to the doctor these days. And this actually is creating a number of divides also in terms of age categories, because in those countries, like mine, for instance, I'm Italian, where the population is aging progressively, it becomes more and more a problem to get this part of the population that, in addition, is the one in need more of societal support, access actually the services they will need. So let me go to Merve, please, to continue this conversation, because I was really intrigued by the concept of the clinique.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we try to do with the clinic, like I said, is to engage more people in these conversations and bridge that one talent gap, as well as the public awareness and public engagement, so you have more voices. But I also want to mention, you know, as a second round of remarks, we're not starting from scratch. Many of the countries represented in this room and beyond already have data protection, privacy, civil rights, anti-discrimination, as well as antitrust laws. So we can already build upon some of these existing and long, laws that have been in place for a long time. It will be about empowering some of these agencies who are investigating and enforcing these regulations to become more powerful, as well as, again, countries working together, so you don't have big technology companies shopping around from one jurisdiction to another for least most flexible privacy regulations or lack thereof. Again, in terms of not inventing the wheel, building upon the successes, we have several AI governance frameworks around the world that have been agreed upon over the years. OECD AI principles, UNESCO recommendations, now EU AI Act. We have the conversations happening at Council of Europe, hopefully seeing the finish line soon. But G7, G20 conversations as well. So we can start building on this, and implementation, as Gabriela Ramos said yesterday, implementation, as well as oversight. So how do we get more involved, move forward and get more people involved in oversight as well. And then the third point is local and indigenous communities needing to have more control and ownership of their data. And driving the conversation, driving the design and development of AI systems, data collection practices, and what kind of AI systems they want to see for what problems that they want to solve, rather than companies coming in, parachuting themselves into these communities, or creating AI products that are imposed upon them, where these communities become the subject or the target of these systems, not necessarily benefit from it. In a lot of the countries, we see data, labor, raw minerals, extraction and exploitation, as well as contributing further to climate change in countries that are already very much burdened with these issues. And then finally, mentioning what we're looking at as assurance and accountability. We talk about access to private systems, private AI systems, proprietary systems, and building capacity as well. We also have examples of this with tax audits, financial audits, etc., where a third party comes in as the trusted advisor, with a non-disclosure agreement, and they get to see everything within the organization and get to provide an assessment and audit on behalf of the public. So we can have those conversations as well and get more researchers, academics, and communities engaged in this assurance and assessment and audit in more wider capacity.
Thanks a lot. Indeed, implementation with accountability, because it's true, we have to act, but we have to be accountable for it. So Shyam, what would be your perspective on this?
Yeah, thank you. I would think about LLM, specifically generative AI, largely about across the supply chain of AI, using two dimensions, one of labor and one of skill. Merve just touched upon labor as well. So to be ethical from a consumer point of view, think about what goes into making this generative AI, right? So across the supply chain, from mining, energy consumption, and up to the disposal of the server technology, quite a lot of marginalized people are involved and affected by it. But on the other end, who is it benefiting? So that level of mapping and policy and regulatory needs on top of that needs to be a way we look at generative AI holistically. Plugging in some of the work we are doing here, Turing's looking at that within my team and upcoming research. And we've also done with GPAI, we've done research on data justice, which speaks to how communities come together to challenge this current trend. And states and academics can learn from civil society on this trend, because they've been confronting issues like this for quite a long time. So what AI or generative AI on top of this brings to the table is nothing new for them. It's just the power concentration is in a different part. That's the only difference. As far as skill is concerned, I am all for upskilling, but again, it has to be across the supply chain. Think about technology developers on one end, horizontally, there is no hierarchy there, and the consumers on the other end, right? We are thinking about access from a point of view of enabling people to use, but we should also be thinking about upskilling technology developers to have the socio-cultural access to know what they are developing. Something I touched upon when I mentioned it earlier. We do need to develop a skills program, so policymakers, much like what Merve was talking about, but also technology developers can come in and kind of refresh their ethical thinking. So you can identify these issues ex ante, and not have to regulate after the fact when discrimination has already happened. And at the other end of consumption, I'm reminded of when I was growing up that computers in primary school were introduced in text years before I ever saw a computer. But we need AI critical literacy like that across the board, because these people who are already using generative AI are already being impacted deeply on what they see on the internet, what they consume going forward. But they have no recourse to understanding what is wrong in the background with these technologies, how to challenge that. That has to be one of the first steps in kind of public sector and private sector engagement. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. You reminded us about a discussion that is ongoing in several constituencies, which is about data justice. But for instance, in the context of the G7, the discussion relates to data free flow with trust. So there is again here an issue of definitions and agreeing upon what we mean and what we might want to leverage upon. And another very, very important element, and UNESCO is working importantly in this direction, and is empowering governments. For too long, many countries around the world have kind of dismissed the human capital they had, in the sense that because of a number of trends, both demographic and also the substitution or not of the civil servants that are inside governments, there has been a progressive inability created implicitly or explicitly that relates to then dealing with challenging issues like AI. So to start with is not an easy task, is not an easy topic. And then in addition, not having the information actually makes the life of those that have to decide much more challenging. And so empowering the government, making them aware, giving them the tools is something that is extremely important and that we all need to work at. So I will go now first to E, please, that I can see is very eager to contribute to this part of the discussion. And then last but not least, we will take back to the perspective from the whole world with Emmanuelle. Please.
What can government do by using generative AI on our traditional cultures? I think this is a fantastic question to answer, but not fantastic in a way, how can we use it, but really fantastic to find, the holes, the limitations of generative AI from the perspective of culture, I would say. So I'm going to give one of the examples here is that if you wanted to learn traditional cultures, you wanted to find how exactly that means, don't talk to ChatGPT. They cannot tell you. So one of our trying something like this, of course you cannot talk to Aristotle, right? But it would be good to understand what is Aristotle's idea towards a technology that can augment human in some way, but also have negative impacts to the society, such as AI. So we created something called digital philosopher. That's not a digital Aristotle. That's an AI that learns about what Aristotle said. And then the AI is answering questions from a perspective with the knowledge from Aristotle. And then you get some inspirations, of course, and then you wanted to know what exactly does these kind of idea come from, and then you have to go back to the original literatures. Otherwise, it does not really help how can you get, how exactly does Aristotle, what Aristotle means. And by that, another example would be, can you tell me, like for 40 years ago, an organization like the United Nations, do they have something to say about how technology is changing the society? Does it really have a documentation related to that? When you're talking to generative AI, they say, oh yeah, there's a bunch of them. And they give you a list of 10 documents, and none of them are real. So they're generated by themselves on the topics. So in that case, you have to use retrieval augmented generative AI. That means actually basically you're using information retrieval to find the exact information that you need. So we cannot rely on generative AI to solve everything. And then now, like I said yesterday, that generative AI now pretend to understand. Well, it's processed statistical significant information and have problems on hallucination. So take it as a reference. Never take it as a source of knowledge. Okay.
Emmanuelle, please.
Thank you. A lot has already been said, so in the interest of time, let me focus on two aspects. The first one is the need for the right business and regulatory environment. As Merve was saying, we can build upon existing laws. True, there are a number of laws that already exist. We need to reinforce some of these laws to address the challenges raised by AI. And what we currently see is actually different regulatory approaches that create barriers. And these barriers will be more detrimental to the countries and companies that do not necessarily have the resources to comply with a multitude of different approaches. So back to my level playing field, I think it's very important to have discussions at an international level on what we mean by personal data protection, for example, and what is the right business and regulatory environment to promote the use of AI as a tool for inclusion. The second point that I want to make is about investment. As was already said, there are 4 billion people without having access to the internet. And even those with access to the internet in many countries have very low bandwidth, which limits their ability to use advanced technologies. In this, when it comes to ICT infrastructure, we really need to mobilize all the resources that are available. So at the WTO, we've partnered with the World Bank and launched a program, Digital Trade for Africa, in 5 African countries to try and build both the ICT infrastructure and the regulatory environment to try and help these countries. But of course, we need more of that. Right now, we're just focusing on 5 countries, but we need many more resources to be mobilized to help developing countries reap the benefits of digital technologies. And I think here, the international community should think about what more can be done, map different programs that exist, and see how they could be leveraged to try and close this digital divide that will increase with the advent of AI. So what we need is a sort of a global pact to close the digital divide by, let's say, 2030. And we need to coordinate our actions for greater impact. So these are really the 2 things that I wanted to emphasize. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So now it's me that has to close, given that we have just 1 minute left. So again, the lucky moderator has speakers that not only say great things and very interesting things, so I think you will have a lot to discuss with them and also among yourself, but also they finish on time, reminding us really with 2 very, very important issues. Always do a reality check. Let's not feel that we have lost it to the technology. It is not the case, and let's not be foolish by those that say, oh, you know, it runs so fast that we cannot run as fast as the technology. There is always something we can do. But of course, the sooner we do it, the better. And I love the conversation, hearing everybody saying there is not anymore a discussion about whether to regulate or not. The question is how to best do it and which kind of institutions we need in the back, because AI is part of today, is going to be even more part of our tomorrows, and we want it to be for ourselves and for our good. So join me to thank all the speakers and yourself for staying with us, and let's reconvene in half an hour. I have my maître de conférence who will inform us. Thank you.